In the aftermath of the Second World War, Britain entered a period of decolonisation. In the literature as it now stands, that story has been told as one of decline, one of disarray, one of reactive policy. The story we have heard is that Britain fumbled from one crisis to another crisis with no overall strategy, no overall policy. They went from the emergency in Palestine to an emergency in Malaya, to an emergency in Kenya, to Cyprus, to Aden, that Britain was reactive, that Britain was defeated. I wanted to see how this could be so quickly after the heights of the Second World War. What was it about British policy? What was it about the British government which allowed this lack of direction? And what I discovered as I went through the archival record was that this story we've been told is actually false. We really need to begin in the summer of 1948. At that time, Britain has just withdrawn from a failed counterinsurgency effort in Palestine. The year prior to that, they had just withdrawn from India. And at that moment in Britain's history, a new emergency begins in Malaya. Initially, the British attempted to fight that insurgency in the same way they had fought the insurgency in Palestine, and indeed in the same way they had fought the Second World War, which is to say they went in with conventional troops, following conventional tactics. A battalion of men would come into the jungle and would perform wide-scale sweeps. The problem, of course, was that you had 650 men, young men, largely national service men, crashing through the jungle, making a terrific amount of noise, and by the time they arrived at the insurgent camps, the insurgents had long gone. So it was a tremendous effort for very little results. By 1950, the British government realised that something was not working. So Arthur Creech-Jones, the Colonial Secretary, in concert with Sir Henry Gurney, the High Commissioner in Malaya, asked Sir Harold Briggs to come to Malaya to be Director of Operation to coordinate the security efforts there and the counterinsurgency campaign. Sir Harold Briggs developed a plan which has become known to history as the Briggs Plan, and within this plan he decided that what the British had to do was separate the civilian population from the insurgency. On the one hand, the civilian population would be given social welfare, would be given education, would be given cultural pursuits, would be brought into the Home Guard, would be slowly brought into the government. On the other hand, the insurgency would be hit quite hard in what I call Britain's dirty wars of empire. My central argument is that beginning in 1950, the British government developed a strategy for decolonisation. And this strategy was that they would devolve power to the indigenous peoples in the hope that upon independence, these peoples would remain within the British sphere of influence, within the Commonwealth, rather than leave it. The British government essentially faced a choice. They had to decolonise. They could not maintain hold of these colonies. The only question was, how would these colonies look upon independence? The British could fight the grant of independence, in which case indigenous peoples may well have turned to the Soviet Union and become communist upon independence, or the British government could have set the terms of decolonisation themselves, could have gradually inculcated within these peoples Western ideals, Western modes of governance, and that was the strategy the British government adopted, and did so with some success. When we look at the world in the 1970s, it is a very different world from the 1940s or the 1930s. In the earlier period, we see a British Empire. By the 1970s, that empire is gone, and it would be tempting for us to think that because of that, British influence was also gone, that a British world had ceased to exist. But as my work shows, Britain, in fact, because of the way they managed decolonisation, was able to retain a great amount of informal influence, that a British world continued to exist long after decolonisation had been completed on a formal basis.